All right, Alexander, let's talk about Italy. And we had elections yesterday on Sunday, and we've got the results. It looks like we will be having a conservative right coalition form. Meloni is slated to be the next prime minister. Brothers Italy, we have Salvini, the League, and we have Berlusconi, Forza Italia. And where do you want to begin with these election results? I'll just say something real quick. Everyone talks about how Meloni may be the game changer in all of this. I think it's going to be difficult, given that she's going to have to deal with the ECB, the fact that Italy's locked into the euro, and when Ursula says we have tools, as a Greek and a Cypriot, I know what those tools are. I think they hinge very much on the euro. Those are her tools. And when you're locked into the euro, which coincidentally is something that Orban in Hungary is not locked into and gives them latitude, when you're locked into the euro, I think you have a much more difficult go at things if you want to take on the EU. But I think the game changer, all that set aside, I think the real game changer in this government is going to be Silvio Berlusconi. Anyway, what are your thoughts?
I agree, actually. Bear in mind, he's by far the most experienced of the three. He's been prime minister. He knows international affairs. He's actually rising. Now, interestingly enough, the most interesting thing about the election in some ways was that Salvini, who just a few years ago looked like he was going to be the unstoppable force in Italian politics, he's fallen back to just about the same level as Berlusconi was. And it shows how he's frittered away, he's thrown away this enormous support base that he'd built up. Most of it's obviously gone to Meloni, but Berlusconi's back. He's now back in government because he's going to be. I expect that he'll be playing a role in the Italian cabinet in some form, even if not directly. And he's the only person, it seems to me, in Italy who not only has that degree of governmental experience, but I think has that knowledge of the world, of the knowledge of the way the EU works, of the knowledge the United States works, of the knowledge that how Russia works. Remember, he and Putin have had this long-standing friendship that, frankly, if this Italian government is going to succeed, they're going to have to depend on him. Now, people find there's an awful lot of things said about Berlusconi, that he's a sort of ridiculous, corrupt person. There's some truth in all of that, but I think people also overlook that he's actually, in fact, a pretty clever man and somebody who dominated Italian politics for years. I think he was at least twice, maybe even 3 times prime minister. He was overthrown. He lost his position as prime minister, not because he was defeated in an election, but because the EU essentially orchestrated a parliamentary and presidential coup against him and replaced him with a technocrat, Monti. So, as I said, I think that, the fact that he's back at the center of power is important, because the other thing to say is that you look at the person who's leading this government, who's going to lead this government, who's Meloni. And can I just say something? I mean, one has to mention that Meloni has achieved a remarkable thing. I mean, her party was at 4% just a few years ago. She's been able to push it forward. If you see her interactions with Italians, her electioneering addresses, the only thing that I know in the West that compares with that is Donald Trump's, actually. She has that same sort of connection with Italians at face-to-face level and in rallies that Donald Trump has with Americans. Obviously, with Italians and Americans who are, minded to look to these people. But for all her undoubted skills and drive, she doesn't have any governmental experience at all. nor does anyone in her party. So I can't help but think that she's going to rely increasingly on the one man in the coalition who does have that, who's Berlusconi. So Berlusconi has survived. He's survived relentless attempts to destroy him politically. He's come through. He's in the coalition. He's now equal with Salvini. I'm not saying he's the kingmaker. I'm not saying he's going to be the eminence grise, the person pulling all the strings. But it does seem to me as if he's well positioned. And I can't help but think that if Meloni really wants to make changes in Italy, she'll have to seek his advice. Because without the advice of someone like Berlusconi, I have to say, she just doesn't look to me really in a position to challenge the forces that she's going to be up against.
Okay, well, what are those forces? I mentioned them in the intro. What I believe is going to be the strongest force pushing against Meloni and and the change that she wants to affect. I think it's the euro. It's the fiat.
Yeah.
That to me is everything. That's what locks in
Well,
a country into the EU system. What do you think?
well, of course it is. I mean, when Ursula von der Leyen says that the EU has tools to deal with anybody who steps out of line, those tools take two forms. One is the EU structural and other funds. We know all about those, the slush funds the EU spends in European countries, which win over business people, win over politicians. That's not to be underestimated. But if you really want to apply real screws, it's through the euro that you can do that. I mean, we both remember what happened in Greece and in Cyprus, how banks in Greece were practically, and the entire banking system was essentially switched off. The same in Cyprus. That's what they can do. Now, Cyprus and Greece are small countries. Italy's a big country. It's got the biggest industrial base in the EU, apart from Germany's. It ought to be, in theory, a strong country. It should be able to push back about this. But in order to do that, the leadership need nerves of steel, and they also need to do what the Tsipras Varoufakis government didn't do in Greece back in 2015, which is work out alternatives to the euro. Now, Meloni, does she realize that? Does she realize how difficult it's going to be? Does she also see that the people she's dealing with are completely implacable? I mean, some of the things that she said give one the impression that she thinks that if she just focuses on topics like immigration and law and order, but goes along with the EU on other things like, economics and Ukraine, that they'll leave her alone. First of all, you've got to understand that economics and Ukraine are so important that your government will fail if you don't address them. That's the first thing to say. The second is that the EU is an unappeasable monster. It wants you wholly on side. If you deviate from it on even the smallest thing, then they will come down against you. So I think that, does Meloni understand that? That's the big question. If she does understand that, then she needs Berlusconi to help her.
You read my mind on how Maloney should govern going forward. And God, if she was like sitting in the room with me right now, this would be my advice. Not that I should be giving advice. Who am I? I'm just some dude in my home speaking to another guy in his home. But the one lesson that we can take away from Russia and from the way Putin handled things in 2014 is this, and the lesson that we can take from Greece and Tsipras, Varoufakis, how they handle things, because we have two different scenarios and they're very much related, very much related. The one scenario was Putin saying, you know what? I'm going to work my way out of the system. I'm going to start to create backup plans so that I'm financially bulletproof. And over the years, step by step, inch by inch, he worked it out. And he made it so that Russia would be able to withstand a massive, massive economic attack, like something we've never seen before in history. He did it. He had his team together. They created alternative systems, alternative processes, everything, and he made it happen. And when they did attack him, Russia stood tall. Greece, on the other hand, when they said we're going to get out of this, or well, they didn't. To be fair, they didn't say we're going to get out of this EU system, but they said, look, no more austerity or else. Let's just paraphrase it as that. No more austerity or else. They didn't have a plan. They didn't create alternative systems. They didn't do anything. So if Meloni was really prepared to make Italy sovereign and whole and powerful and strong inside the EU or outside of the EU, whatever decision the Italian people take, I would tell her exactly what you said. Today, get a team together and start creating backup alternative plans in case the EU attacks you with the euro fiat, because that's where they're going to attack you. Everyone knows it. Yeah, the funds, they'll do what they did to Hungary with the funds, but where they can really make it hurt is when they shut off your ATM machines, when they stop giving you euros, when they stop buying up bonds or stuff like that. That's where they can really hit you. What do you think?
You're absolutely correct. And by the way, be under no doubt that that's what they will do. I mean, the other thing I was just wanted to say is that, of course, Meloni is a social conservative. She wants to pursue social conservative policies in Italy. Again, I wonder whether she realizes how unacceptable to the EU leadership that is. The EU leadership will interpret any move like that, any attempts to take positions which Meloni would say are intended to support the family. They will see that as, they will call that, they will use the F word, they will call that repression, they will call it backsliding on democracy, and they will put pressure on you. And when the pressure comes, it doesn't stop. They will then use all of the various devices up to and including the euro. And of course, one mechanism that they can do, and which would have an immediate effect, is that they can start putting pressure on Italian debt. The European Central Bank now owns an awful lot of Italian debt. So it can start to say, well, we're not going to buy as much Italian debt as we have, which will start creating financial problems, real pressures within the Italian banking and financial systems. Now, that doesn't mean Italy doesn't have things it can do in response. It's got lots of things it can do in response. Italy is actually a rich country, contrary to what many people think. It's got deep resources. It's got some very talented technocrats. It's got lots of things it could do, but it's got to start working on doing all of those things quickly and now, and not waiting, a week, a month, a year, and saying to yourself, well, if I just go along with what they want on Ukraine, or go along what they want on, Euro bonds or whatever it is they want, that, they'll leave me alone so I can deal on immigration and law and order and support for the family. It doesn't work like that with the EU. For them, it's all or nothing. And if you're not with them 100%, they're against you 100%. And they won't rest until you're smashed. And not just smashed, but smashed beyond retrieval. And that's something I don't know whether Meloni, who's inexperienced in politics, has really understood.
Look what they did to Austria and Kurz. Look at what they're doing to Hungary. Look what they're doing to Poland. And Poland's all in with regards to Ukraine. I mean, they're 1,000% in with regards to Ukraine, but still, just because they deviated a bit on the legal stuff, The EU said no chance. Nope, we're going to go after you as well. So I mean, there's no such thing as being 95% in agreement with the EU. It's either 100% or you're out.
Absolutely.
To end the video, what things could Italy do, practically speaking, to prepare itself with regards to some sort of financial attack?
The first thing
Like,
they
can you
can
think of some
do,
stuff that they could probably prepare for that maybe
yeah,
Greece should have done,
yeah, absolutely.
way
Well,
back when?
the obvious thing they do, the first things they need to do, there's a number of things they need to do. Firstly, they need to start talking with their banks about setting up alternative messaging systems. I mean, we've seen how Swift has been used now. And bear in mind that Swift is supervised. It comes under EU control. It falls within under EU regulations. So you need to start taking steps to make sure that the flow of money, flow of funds within Italy itself continues smoothly. The second is you need to make up backup. Well, I'm going to call it straightforwardly a backup currency. You need to be prepared. You need to start taking steps to support the lira, to reintroduce the lira. And the next thing you need to do, right? I mean, first of all, you need to sort out your fiscal ship. I mean, Italy's continuously overspends. That's always a problem. But they also need to be prepared to talk to Italy's creditors. Now, that's not as challenging as it may sound, because a lot of Italy's creditors are themselves Italians. So that has to be something that they're prepared to do, so that if there is a sudden pullback by the EU of support for Italy's debt, then what Italy can do in that kind of situation is, instead of going back to the EU and asking for help from the EU and going to the IMF and getting involved in all those sort of things, it can itself invite the creditors to agree a restructuring, which is something, of course, which Greece never did. So that, by the way, even more than in reintroducing your own currency, would be a declaration of independence.
Yeah, real quick, if Italy were to do all of that and many other things, if it got its house in order and it got prepared, it would then be able to exert a tremendous amount of leverage on the EU, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, it would be in
absolutely.
the driver's seat.
Absolutely, yes. It's the second, I mean, by some calculations, it's actually the second biggest economy in the EU, not just the country with the second biggest industrial base. And it's also, I mean, it accounts for a very large part of, of the entire EU system. Italy was a founding state of the EU. It's one of the big three, along with France and Germany. I mean, without Italy, the whole EU system starts to look like it's falling apart. So they can't afford to let Italy go. If Italy plays hardball, if Meloni keeps her cool, if she goes into meetings with Ursula and all of the others and Tindemans and all of these awful people and says, look, I'm not taking any nonsense. If you want to play this game, I'm prepared to play rough. I'm also prepared to even contemplate default on the loans, on the outstanding loans the Italy has with the ECB, for example, which would drive the Germans absolutely up the wall. If she's prepared to play tough, she's got plenty of cards to play. Now, she's partly won the election on the basis that she's a tough figure, that she's a strong personality, that she clawed her way up Italian politics, that she came from the working class areas of Rome. She talks with a Roman accent, apparently. So, that's one reason why Italians voted for her. They saw her as a real, strong, tough person. She's now got to stop acting like that. And she's got to get advice. Because all of the things that I've said, you can't just do them. You need people to help you do them. Those people Italy has in abundance. It's a highly advanced country. There's lots of people in Italy who can help you set up currencies, help you set up messaging systems, talk to creditors, work out economic policies for you. So she can find that team. She can talk to Berlusconi, who knows a lot of these people because he's been prime minister and he's been central in the Italian business world for a very long time. And of course, she's also got to start thinking about foreign policy as well. And at some point, if she's going to stabilize the situation in Italy, she needs a steady flow of gas and oil to Italy. And where's that going to come from practically? It's not going to come from Algeria, as Mario Draghi pretended. It has to come from Russia. Italy's relations with Russia have been very good until very recently. Draghi obliterated them. She's got to put her own visceral Atlanticism to one side and do what the situation needs for Italy, which is talk to the Russians. And again, Berlusconi is the obvious person to help her do that.
Yeah. Real quick, the United States, is it a wild card in how Meloni's going to govern?
Of course it is. Of course it is. And the US has enormous influence in Italy. It's got lots of bases there. There's lots of people there. The Italian and US intelligence systems are interconnected. There's a history between Italy and the Italian secret services and the American secret services that stretches all the way back to the Second World War. The US has a huge amount of influence. And this is something else. I mean, Meloni seems to be instinctively Atlanticist in many of her ideas. She's got to understand that on these issues, especially with this administration, the US is going to stand with the EU. It's not going to support her. Now, if it had been Donald Trump in the White House, it might have been different. But with this administration, they're not going to be sympathetic to her or sentimental to her because she's got some, I don't think they're particularly strong, by the way, but she's got some residual Atlanticist sympathies from, the times when Italy, relied on the American ally to keep the communists at bay and all that kind of thing. I mean, I think she's got to put all that to one side and understand that the US has to be watched extremely carefully and that possibilities of color revolution operations in Italy are very real.
All right. Well, she's got quite a challenge ahead of her.
Oh, yeah.
All right. The Duran.locals.com, everybody. Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code. Good day.